You're listening to Season 2 of Beyond Insights, your go-to podcast for all things accounting, business, and technology.
Unsure how to improve your leadership skills, or whether you're suited to being a leader to begin with? Looking for ways to build a stronger team or take better risks? Then stay tuned.
From cybersecurity, blockchain, and AI innovations to sustainability, employee retention, and work-life balance, we've got you covered.
We speak to knowledgeable and insightful guests from varied backgrounds, industries, and locations from all around the globe.
From this multiplicity of thought, we strive to find solutions to our most urgent business problems.
Whether you're a small business owner, an accountant, entrepreneur, or even a young professional looking to progress, this podcast is for you.
Thank you for tuning in. Let's dive right in and go beyond insights.
Hi everyone, welcome back to Beyond Insights. In this episode, we're diving deep into the art and science of building strong teams, a topic that's crucial for any organization. We'll be exploring key concepts and practical strategies from the perspective of someone who is intimately familiar with finding talent and building teams in the dynamic world of tech. So today's guest is Philip Joubert, co-founder of OfferZen. In case you don't know, OfferZen is South Africa's largest tech marketplace, connecting top tech talent to the best opportunities. So thanks for joining us, Philip.
Thanks very much for having me.
Awesome. I thought maybe we could start with you telling us a bit about yourself, maybe a bit more about OfferZen.
Nice, yeah, happy to. So I started working in startups many years ago. I feel old now. So I actually started while I was studying at university. I studied industrial engineering, and then my brother had a startup at the time. And one holiday he said, just come work with us. And I never left. I just continued working full time while I was studying. So I have been in startups my whole life. I realized about a week ago that I've never actually applied for a job in my whole life. I've just been building various businesses. My brother Milan and I ran a venture studio called Fire ID, and that was quite successful. We started companies like SnapScan and Luno, and then subsequent to that, we lived in Silicon Valley for a couple of years, and then out of that came OfferZen, and then we moved back to South Africa to start the business.
Wow, that's a really interesting CV. I think also being in the recruitment space, but not having ever had to go for an interview is quite unexpected.
Yes, I mean, I have interviewed hundreds, possibly thousands of people at this point, and yes, I feel slightly inexperienced when I realized this.
What's something that might surprise people about the kind of work that you do?
Well, I think, I guess, at OfferZen, we work with hundreds of companies that are hiring for mainly software engineers, but it's basically the entire tech team. So it includes product managers and designers, basically everyone who's involved in building software. I think the thing that has surprised me the most over the years is just how bad the average company is at hiring. And if one of our customers are listening, no, it's not you, it's someone else. But really, the average company is absolutely terrible at hiring. And I guess it's extra ironic because most companies think that they have amazing teams, and they think that they are very good at hiring and very good judges of talent. Which, just to be clear, I'm not sitting here on a high horse saying I'm the expert and all of that, but it really is amazing how bad these companies are at hiring. And I think to a large degree, the reason businesses like ours exist is, yes, we do solve fundamental problems, but in terms of like sourcing really good talent and all of that and saving time. But partly it's also just because companies aren't great at hiring.
Yeah, I think hiring is a really difficult thing to do, and especially if you're a small company and you don't have a sort of dedicated HR team or recruitment team. It's maybe like the founder who's trying to hire those first few employees. It is probably very different from the day-to-day work that they do, and a different way of thinking about things.
100%. And I think it's also a skill which the feedback loop is very slow for. So, if you learn how to surf or skateboard or whatever it is, the feedback loop is pretty fast. You fall down, you go, "Ooh, obviously that wasn't that wasn't the right way to pop up. Next time I need to paddle earlier or whatever it is." But with hiring, that feedback loop plays out over weeks, months, or sometimes even years when it comes to executive hiring. So I think it gets really, really hard to just learn that skill. And I think, yeah, it's tough, and they're not really shortcuts. Yes, you can get mentorship, and that helps a lot, but you don't necessarily understand things fully until you've made some mistakes. So I think it's just a painful gauntlet to go through.
Yeah, for sure. Why do you think that small businesses or maybe new businesses should prioritize hiring even in their early days? I know that oftentimes they may be focused more on the product that they're developing or on the service that they're providing. But I know you always say hiring is one of the first things to think about. Why is that?
Yeah, so I want to just clarify with your question. I think is I don't think it's important to hire lots of people. In fact, I think when you when you're early on, you should be hiring as few people as possible, and we can get into that a little bit. But yeah, I definitely don't think you should be hiring a lot. But I do think you should be spending a huge amount of time on making sure that you hire the right people. I
Suppose
think
it's
when you build
focus on, sorry, focus on quality rather than quantity.
Exactly. So I think when you're a startup, you typically you start the business because you have some idea for a product of some sort, right? You want to solve a problem in the market, and you get very excited about that thing. But what you're actually doing when building a company, typically you're not building a product and then figuring out, okay, what team do I need? You really actually start with a team and you go, okay, so I'm building a team, and so that team can build a product, and so that like the success of that product can allow me to actually build a real company. That's typically how it is. Now, obviously, that doesn't mean, on day one you start hiring. You probably do want to build a prototype and get some users and whatnot.
Sure.
But I think for the product to really mature, you want to be thinking, okay, what team do I need? Especially in the early days when you don't quite know what it is that you're doing. You need a team that's flexible enough that team will probably survive a pivot or two that the company might go on.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that's one aspect of it. I think then the other thing to think about hiring, why you should think about hiring, is just it's your biggest expense. Typically when you're starting a business, it is the biggest line item. So if you get it wrong, or if you hire too much, that's really bad, and it just shortens your runway, it shortens your ability to figure out and adapt to whatever the market is telling you. I think then another aspect is like generally the thing I like to say is the first 10 employees become the first 100 employees. It's a couple of reasons for that, but basically that initial core team is super, super important. And I guess what happens is that once you've hired some people in the team, that is a thing that attracts more employees, right? They come and evaluate the team. Like before, there's really this big organization, and you have a ton of press, and you have this established thing. What they're really evaluating are the people in the business. So I think that's one aspect. And then the other thing is those employees, that your initial employees, will interview the new candidates, presumably. And again, they will filter those candidates by people like them. And that is not necessarily a bad thing if you have really, really high quality people. But I think if you get your first 10 right, that's the most important when building a business. And then lastly, in terms of this, is I think the people underestimate the difference between average performers and top performers. They kind of just compress the band a little bit. They go, okay, so obviously there are better people, but better people, they're only so much better. And I think we massively underestimate that. I think even more so if you consider what AI can do and how much leverage it can give you, right? A top performer can now output today maybe 5 times as much, depending on which domain they're in, than they could, 3 years ago. So I think that's one really big thing. And then there's certain problems that can't really be solved by I want to say normies. So you can take 10 designers.
Average person.
Yeah, you can take 10 average designers and give them, let's say, 10 years, and they probably wouldn't be able to make a design as good as Johnny Ive could do in a month. Like those 10 designers aren't going to design the iPhone. You can give them however long, unless they're not going to, or at least rather, they're not going to design the next iPhone. So it's not even just about a sort of people aren't fungible. Like really, really good people are extremely valuable. So sorry, that's a very long answer, but I'm very passionate about, about
No,
building
it's
teams.
great. I think it's a lot to think about. Maybe starting with the idea of your first 10 employees leading to your first 100 employees. I think that's a big one to remember because, as you said, they're going to end up being the people who are hiring the next round of employees. And usually great people know great people. So if you start off with a good base of employees, then that's a really solid foundation. Whereas if you start off with quite bad or average employees, that can be quite a costly mistake. I know one of the areas in which you've mentioned before you can tap into some really great talent is undiscovered talent. Maybe you could expand on what you mean by undiscovered talent and how do you discover that talent?
Yeah, that's a good question, especially the second part, which is hard figuring out kind of where these people are. But so as a startup, you're generally at a significant disadvantage for hiring. So I think there's this sort of, I want to say, mythos around startups and early stage teams where there's this crack team that is absolutely amazing and we hire the elite. But in practice, the very, very good people are often working at some kind of large company earning a massive salary and they have no interest in joining your company. And so it's easy to look, startup founders often we look down on those type of people and go, they're not real startup people, but actually there are some really, really amazing people working at big companies earning massive salaries. And the problem with that is you as a small business, it just doesn't make economic sense for those people to join your company, right? It doesn't make sense. And so you're in this kind of dilemma. You can either hire average people, because you can always hire average people, or you need to find top performers that aren't obviously top performers. So that is kind of the challenge. And so what you then end up needing to do is you basically want to find undiscovered talent. And so you're looking for people that a larger organization or a more well-funded organization would look over. So essentially sort of diamonds in the rough. There's maybe something wrong with them, in quotes, just to be clear. There's something where they don't look perfect on paper. So maybe they didn't go to a top university. Maybe they are very young. For instance, Stripe, the payments company, hired their first designer while he was still in high school. So so it's basically it's finding exceptional people before other people have found them. That is obviously way easier said than done, right? Because it's similar to, let's say, maybe you are scouting for sports teams, right? So the NBA team or whatever, they send someone to high school games to figure out who are the good upcoming players, that type of thing. So you're trying to do that, and I think there's a whole art and science to finding out who those people are, which we can get into if you like. But yeah, that to me is the sort of main thing is you don't have the capital, you don't have the brand, right? You're just this tiny company. And so unless you're a famous founder already and have, had a successful exit, then you're massively disadvantaged in terms of hiring. And so to compensate for that, you need to find undiscovered talent.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. I guess what you're looking for is potential, which is probably why a lot of these candidates will be young. So they won't have gone to these big companies yet. Maybe they don't have the experience that you would typically look for, but they have the potential. And that potential means that they can upskill quickly. And it's just finding those diamonds in the rough, as you say.
Exactly. And definitely they do tend to skew younger. So I wouldn't say it's not an age discrimination thing. I wouldn't be able to hire this person if they were 30 years old because by that time everyone else would have realized how amazing they are. So I hire them when they're 21 when it's not obvious yet.
So at Sift, the average age of our average age of an employee at SIFT is 26. And I actually think most people are younger than that average age. There are a few of us who are a bit older who are skewing that upwards. So we have people who have come like straight out of university, 21, 22, did brilliantly at university, but they don't really have work experience, so they haven't really been discovered in that sense by other people. And if I think about even when I joined, I also didn't come with any experience working in tech, working with anything to do with accounting either. So really had a very non-traditional background, and they kind of took a chance on me, which I'm obviously very grateful for. So I can resonate a lot with that, trying to find sort of unusual, undiscovered talent in a startup environment.
And just to add on this theme a little bit, it does bring about a lot of challenges. Obviously, bringing on, young people that don't have the experience, and even the best person in the world at hiring isn't able to perfectly predict high potential people at the early stages. So you are going to make some mistakes as well. That's, I think, the disadvantage of this, looking for undiscovered talent, is you run into this problem where you make hires that just don't pan out.
Yeah, I think you take a lot of risks trying to find undiscovered talent. I suppose if we go back to the kind of characteristics that you should look for when you're hiring, apart from trying to find these maybe non-traditional people, what are the characteristics that you look for? Who would you consider to be your sort of A players?
Yeah, so I think this is a question where different people answer this question, I think, very differently, and everyone always has their the favorite things that they look for, some sort of motivation or some sort of other thing. I've obviously thought about this quite a bit. For me, my sort of the most important thing is hunger. And it's basically there's someone's drive to achieve something. So maybe that is, the motivation doesn't need to be pure and noble, but they need to have this very strong sense of needing to do something in the world. Maybe that's proving their parents wrong. Maybe that is a noble thing, like, they want to change the world. Maybe that is, I guess in the Social Network movie, they sort of frame this as Mark Zuckerberg is sad about his girlfriend dumping him. But that type of thing, it's basically any reason that you can see where someone has a chip on their shoulder and wants to prove to the world that they can do something. So I think that's really, really important. And I think if you have that as the foundation, you can compensate for a lot of other weaknesses. There's this intense desire to achieve something just really does compensate for a lot. I think then the rest are not in any particular order, but just someone who gets things done. So I think there are people that have a bias to action, and there are those that don't, that like to think. And in a startup, you really need people that have a massive bias to action. So I think people who are just not just a bias to action, but also who have the ability to actually get it done, not just someone who kind of flails about. I think people who are optimistic is really important. Some sort of optimism. You're going to spend all day with this this person, presumably. You want someone who's generally sees a glass half full, or even better, makes a glass full, if they have the skill sets to back it up. But things are definitely going to go wrong in a smaller company. I mean, also a larger company, but in a smaller company, you really need people to rally around even when things are tough. And I think you can sort of, if you get negative Nancy's in your team, they really can poison the well. And yeah, so I definitely think you want optimists. Someone who has high standards. I found that it's semi-transferable. So if they have high standards in one domain, it often can sort of transfer to another domain. But they need to have kind of worked extremely hard at something and have a high standard, whether that is, they're elite at some video game or a sport, or ideally, obviously, in the role itself, where they just have a high standard. And so things that you might look for are they obsessive about what world-class looks like in a domain? right? Ask them. So like, no one gets to be, you don't get to be a pro golfer by just, doing it yourself. You're looking at other people. You're looking at how other people swing. You are watching tons of videos. Like you're obsessed about that thing, and you ideally want someone who is going to do that about whatever the craft is that you need them to do in your business. So I think that's one. And then the last one is just being very resourceful. So someone who can just get it done. If they walk into a brick wall, they, figure out how to dig through it, climb over it, dig under it. Someone who can
They
do
make a
those things.
plan.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's really important, especially in a business that's just starting out or is quite small, to have people who really try to get things done, who are obsessive about trying to find ways to really do a good job as well. I was wondering maybe if you could talk a little bit about the idea of value creation versus value protection, and how this can help in strategically building a team who have complementary strengths.
Yeah, so it's just, I guess that is just a lens on looking at roles in a business. So value creation roles are roles which create new value, and value protection roles are roles that protect existing value. So an example of, let's say, a value protecting role would be um, maybe a CFO, or maybe an HR person, something like that. Essentially, you have something like the assumption with that role is there is this valuable thing. We need to not screw it up, right? So we have a great team. We need to protect that team and make sure people stay in the business and whatnot. And then value creation is, let's say, typically it's people that build something. So that would be a software engineer. It might be a designer. It might be someone who's actually creating a thing in some way. Typically, that is the sort of distinction. And why this is a helpful lens is because at the start you have no value, right? So even though maybe technically your business is valued at a few $1 million because you raise a seed fund, for all practical purposes, you have nothing. There's no real business there. And so initially you want to have a heavy bias for value creation roles, people that just do things. And you want to delay your value protection roles as long as is possible, because often they actually put a drag, and not necessarily in a bad way. Always, it makes sense to hire value protectors, but they do often put a drag on systems, right? So if you just hire an HR person when you're 5 people, what are they going to want to do? They're going to want to add processes. They're going to want to say, okay, well, we need to have performance reviews. We need to do this. We need to do that. And some of those things might be good, but they'll also slow you down. And when you're very small, one of the few things you have going for you is speed. So you typically, when you're very early stages, just exclusively want to hire value creation roles.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. You want to create something that you will later be able to protect.
Exactly.
I really liked the analogy that you had mentioned in the presentation you shared with me earlier about barrels versus ammunition. I think that also works quite well with thinking about how you allocate resources in a team. I wondered if you could maybe take us through that.
Yeah, I think it's Keith Raboy who came up with this concept. But the basic idea is that most people are ammunition. And so what that means is when you give them a task to do, they will generally do it to the best of their ability. And in most companies, the vast majority of people are ammunition, and there's nothing bad about ammunition. Ammunition's great. In terms of, the best people will often be ammunition. But there's another group of people too, and those are barrels. And so the analogy is you shoot ammunition through the barrels. That's that's the analogy. And the barrels are basically people that can come up with an original idea, they can rally the team, they can find a way to get it done in your business. And typically you only have a few barrels in your business, and they're really, really hard to find. There's lots of people that aspire to be able to do that kind of work, but for one or other reason they can't. So the I think a mistake a lot of people make is they think we need to go faster in our business. So, okay, cool, we're going to hire. And then what they do is they hire more ammunition when the actual bottleneck in the business is is barrels. It's people who can actually conceptualize something and get it done and rally a team around it. And just to be clear, this doesn't mean a manager. I think you can be a barrel as an individual contributor. It's just you just get these people that just they're able to will an organization to do something and get everyone behind it and make sure it's done. Not like 90%, but actually get it done. And those are really, really hard to find. Keith Boy's advice is whenever you have the chance to hire one of these barrels, you should hire them. Not every startup has that, has the capital necessary to do that, especially early on, but it really does pay off. I think something which you often underestimate is just how much of a level up it is hiring a really, really, really good person. Like despite all the challenges you have, if you just put a really, really, really good person in that function, often the problems just get solved. And so I think his general advice is totally spot on, which is always be on the lookout for people that can be barrels.
Yeah, sounds like really good advice. Of course, difficult to identify. But I think when you find someone who fits that kind of image, then you should really go for them.
100%.
I thought maybe now would be a good time to consider the interview process. Obviously, this is a very critical part of hiring, but a lot of people find it quite difficult. How within the interview do you determine if that candidate has the qualities that you're looking for?
Okay, so I want to just zoom out a little bit. So I think there's a couple of things that you need to get right to in order to be able to in the interview make that assessment. So I think the one is just being clear on what you're looking for. So having a really, really good what I call job scorecard. So that's basically a description of what you need the person to do, the competencies you're looking for. I think what a lot of people do is they write a job ad, meaning something that is designed to attract people. It's essentially a marketing artifact, right? You put it out in the world and it says, Alex, please join my company. Or you saying in the abstract, people like you join my company.
Yes.
And that's obviously a really important thing. And you do want to attract people, but it's not telling you exactly what you're looking for. And I think if you're vague on what you're looking for, then it's really hard in an interview to know that. It's sort of, you don't have a benchmark kind of that you're measuring it. So I think that's one bit. I think the second thing would be is just making sure that you're fishing in the right pond, just that you're sourcing, because fundamentally your ability to hire amazing people is at least the upper limit for that is set by how you're sourcing. Are you even interviewing amazing people to begin with? Because if you're not interviewing the right people, then you will never have a chance of hiring them. Okay, and then so now you've been clear on what you're looking for. You're fishing in the right pond, so you have some high quality people, but you also have some bad people, and you need to differentiate between those. And you're in an interview now. I think one of the easiest hacks to do is just run a structured interview process. And so what that means is you have clear steps that you take people through, and you have standardized, at least to some degree, questions that you're running people through. I think that makes a massive difference. And the reason it's so powerful, and I think so many people underestimate it, is that you get to benchmark a lot of people on the same questions, and it becomes so much easier. It's kind of like interviewing on easy mode in comparison to just let's have a conversation, let's vibe out, and at the end I'll form some conclusion based on our discussion. It's way, way harder. And if let's say, you look at the, like famous people talking about how they interview, let's say whatever, you look at Elon Musk, how he talks about it. He just says he doesn't do a structured thing. He just speaks to someone. But let's call it elite level hiring. Once you're good enough, you don't need the process. But for everyone else, just use the structured process. I think that's a really big one. And then I would say also getting people to do real world tasks is, I think, for almost any role, you can get someone to do real world tasks, and whether that's a synchronous thing that you do with them, or whether it's a take home task. It's very common in software engineering to ask someone to do a little test, build a little app, that kind of thing. But for some reason, when you're hiring let's say a customer success manager, or when you're hiring a marketer, often you just speak to them for 2 hours or something like that. And then at the end you go, cool, well, after that period of time, I'm going to make this ridiculously important decision, both for our business as well as expecting them to make that decision. So anyways, I think that is, yeah, you definitely want people to be doing something, which again, it's if they all do the same thing, it's easy to benchmark. And just add one pro tip there is having tasks that I want to say don't have a correct answer. If there's a sort of correct answer, it doesn't give you that much information. With the reason being is you can't differentiate between someone who's amazing and someone who's just good, because there's a correct answer, and both a good person and an amazing person will do it. You ideally want a task where it's possible to overachieve to a massive degree. So it's very easy to go, wow, this person did just 100x better job at the task. And
Yeah, I think that's
sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, really useful tip. I think, someone can be really great on paper. Maybe they interview really well. They're really good at speaking and they've really rehearsed that. But to know whether they're going to be good at the job, you have to actually see them do something that they would be doing in that job.
100%. And obviously this, might be thinking this is at odds with me saying, you want to be going for undiscovered talent, right? Because you're going to get a bunch of noobs potentially doing this task. I think you're not looking for necessarily always just in absolute terms what is the best task that they've done. Sometimes it's about the conversation you have with them afterwards about how they thought about it, because you're really hiring these undiscovered talents on their trajectory, not their absolute position, because their absolute position is lower than some other people you might be able to hire. But the reason you're hiring them is because their trajectory is really, really good. And so it's not as simple as just saying they did a great job on the task. Hire them. They didn't do a great job. Don't hire them. You want to be looking for, places where they really, really shine. And I think that's generally true. There's this idea, I'm not actually sure who coined this, but hire for strengths, not lack of weaknesses. And in general, what you want to be looking for throughout the interview process is you want to be able to, at the end, when you're ready and you have like 5 finalist candidates, you want to be able to, for each of them, describe what are their specific strengths, what are they really, really exceptional at, like the best. If they joined your company, they would be the best at X. And if you can't do that, you should definitely not hire them. But if you can do that, then you can consider, okay, well, is that strength so strong that it's okay to compensate for the weaknesses they have? But fundamentally, you want to be looking at strengths, not a lack of weaknesses. Otherwise, you hire these sort of average people that don't do anything amazing.
So you're kind of looking for people who have specialist strengths, like they have something that they're better than all the other candidates at. Because of course, everyone's going to have some weaknesses, and maybe those are things that they can improve in the job, but at least they are excellent at these few things that you really want them to be excellent at.
100%. And it doesn't have to be, I want to say, it doesn't have to be something like they are the world's best designer, right? Let's say you're hiring for a designer, but you're trying to find someone who doesn't necessarily have experience. They don't need to be the world's best designer. You're looking for the raw form of the talent. So maybe it's in your company, it's really important that the designer is able to speak to customers, and they are off the charts good at that. They are just so good at extracting information from people and really understanding them and empathizing with them. Then even if they may be lacking in other areas, cool, this person's going to join and just kick total ass, and they'll learn the other bits that they're maybe not good at.
Yeah, absolutely. I think maybe just to wrap up our podcast as we're reaching the end of our time, I'll give you some rapid fire questions.
Let's do it.
Yeah. What's one piece of software, I have to say, besides Sift, that you can't live without?
So every year I kind of have an app of the year. And Super Whisper was my app of the year last year. What Super Whisper is, it's a transcription app for Mac and Windows. And that sounds very vanilla, but basically you just press a shortcut key and it transcribes your voice. And it has lots of magical things, but the basic idea is you can speak about 3 times faster than you can type. So I almost don't type anything anymore. I just speak to my computer.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm definitely going to look that up.
You should. It is really, really good.
What's the best book you've read recently? or the best podcast you've listened to?
I think The NVIDIA Way would probably be one of the best books I've read recently. It's generally these types of books, especially when company's doing really well. This some journalist writes a story about the top company, and I don't expect too much from it, but actually this journalist did a really, really good job. He had tons of meetings with employees, former and current at NVIDIA, and they actually captured quite a bit about the business that is far beyond what I would expect a journalist to capture about a business. So I was super, super impressed with that book.
Oh, sounds great. What's the most valuable lesson you've learned about building a business?
I think maybe just as a founder that in order to build a successful business, you as a human being need to grow. I think it's kind of non-intuitive, but you become the bottleneck for the business at some point, and then you need to grow up or grow in some sort of dimension.
And if there's just one thing that people take away from today's podcast, what would you want it to be?
I think it would be that maybe something that it is possible to learn to be excellent at hiring. And learning to be good at hiring is the highest leverage skill you can have. Because if you get that right, every other challenge in your business becomes so much easier. If you can, find find and evaluate and attract really, really good people. So that feels like the main thing is like if you just believe it's a learnable skill and you realize how much leverage there is, then if that's your mission and you do that, life will be so much easier for you.
100%. I think that's a really good takeaway from today's episode. I've learned a lot about building a team, how to improve your hiring, and just how important it is to find those really excellent people, especially at the beginning of your business. So thanks so much for joining me on Beyond Insights, Philip.
Thanks very much for having me.
A pleasure. And everyone watching, we will see you next time.
Thanks for tuning in to the Beyond Insights podcast.
Please like and subscribe on whatever platform you're listening to right now.
And please share with any of your colleagues or friends or family members that you think might benefit from listening to this podcast.
That's all from us. Until next time, see you then.